Hey everyone, this is your host Sophia Nelson, and welcome to the Building Bridges podcast, sponsored by the Redefining Freedom Center of Virginia, a 501c3. It's Women's History Month, and I wanted to do a special episode this month because we need to celebrate amazing women. And my guest today is someone who I think is pretty amazing. I've known her for a pretty good while, served on board with her, worked with her in some past lives on political things and the things that we're both interested in. But Lindsey Williams Drath is with us today, and she is the executive director of the Forward Party. Now, some of you are thinking, what is that, Sophia? What is the Forward Party? Well, I'm glad you asked, because we're going to talk about that today. And I wanted to spotlight a woman who is literally devoting herself. She's a mom, she's a wife, but she's devoting herself to changing our politics, to helping us achieve a more perfect union. She dedicates herself to that goal every day. And Lindsey, welcome to the Building Bridges podcast.
Hello, Sophia. Thank you so much for having me today.
My pleasure. Let's get right into it. First thoughts on, okay, so it's been about 50 days of crazy, right? And Women's History Month. Before that was Black History Month. Big assaults on DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, stripping out the words that they can't put on anything in our government, in our military, etc. But it is Women's History Month. So I'd first like to get your thoughts on Women's History Month and why it matters, and your thoughts on just where things are going right now around diversity and inclusion.
Thank you again for having me, Sophia. There is an extraordinary play on Broadway right now called Six. Have you seen it?
I've heard about.
The music is infectious, and I highly encourage you go and see it. And it is a competition between the six wives of Henry VIII to compete against one another for who had it the worst. Who had
Wow.
it the worst as a wife of Henry VIII? And I don't think I'm a spoiler here because this is historically based, right? But at the end, they come together and they acknowledge that the only reason that they are famous, the only reason they are infamous in history, is because of their husband. So we have a long history in humankind and a more recent history in Western civilization of diminishing the importance that women have had in establishing incredible change and being being the impetus for real change. And I thought that Six did a wonderful way with humor and music and entertainment, taking you through a journey of these women and their own individual lives. And at the end, recognizing the reason they are in the history books is not because of their own unique stories, but because of their affiliation with a very powerful man. So there is a lot of room now to make sure that the history books are filled with the stories of women, not because of their affiliation with a powerful man, but because of the powerful change that they started, that they initiated, that they shepherded through. And we're doing a much better job of it. We're doing a much better job, but there are real structural limitations to women's ability to access the same level of power and influence that men have. That is true in politics. It's true in business. It's true in culture and thought leadership and academia. And the question I think right now that we are faced with as Americans is if there is a fundamental structural barrier for entry for anyone who is an underrepresented and marginalized person in our society, are we supposed to Horatio Alger it? Or do we acknowledge the structural barrier for entry and create, and I use this not just as a metaphor, but truly a ramp. You look at DEI isn't just people of color. It is someone who is physically limited in their ability to access something, right? So you look at the Americans with Disabilities Act. That is DEI, right? That is making sure that someone is included and has access. What does it look like for those ramps and those bridges? This is a bridging podcast. What does it look like for us to acknowledge the need to create those in order to really have parity in representation in all places in our society.
That's good. That's good, folks. That's one of the best answers to a question I've had as long as I've been doing this. And
And I'm
I
not
love it.
I'm not a Broadway nut, but I just
Well, no, Broadway art imitates life, right? And
does.
so, big fan of British literature and history. And, I would think Anne Boleyn wins hand down, but I guess Catherine Howard got beheaded also. So they both probably had the worst of it because they literally lost their heads over their husband. But I think that your point is a good one, that in the 21st century, women have their own power in their own right. It's not inherited, it's not passed down. Or, one of my political heroes is Margaret Chase Smith. God, we need like 50 of her in the US Senate right now. And I think of her being the only woman at the time in the 1950s. And she's the only person, not the boys, the lady stands up against, McCarthy and McCarthyism and the Red Scare and the Vietnam War later. And her declaration of conscience is something that, again, we need desperately right now. And I admire her, but a lot of people don't know that the great Margaret Chase Smith got her husband's seat. And that was a very common thing back then. Even in the 40s, the 50s, you would have women who would either, however they were able to do it, give them to finish out the term, and then they would run for the seat in their own right, as she did, and win. But the point is, we don't have to do that anymore. There are 28 women in the United States Senate in their own right, which is very exciting. And two, for the first time ever, are African American women. So that's very exciting to me. But I think that to kind of piggyback on your point about where we are, and I love the way you talked about when you think about DEI, Lindsey, I hate that it has become this dividing line and like it's taking something away from someone else in order for women, white women, women of color, other marginalized groups, LGBTQ plus, et cetera, people with disabilities, veterans. I don't think most Americans know, Lindsey, how many people fit under that umbrella
Yep.
of diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is kind of interesting. But not to get off on a tangent on that, I kind of wanted to just roll into Women's History Month and remind people that it is important that we celebrate women, that it is important that young girls, your daughter, you got one girl, right? Or two?
Two
You have
girls.
two daughters.
I have two
So
girls.
your daughters, you want them to not just be present with the time they live in, where they can see Taylor Swift being a billionaire and they can see women running for president, Kamala Harris, Hillary Clinton, etc., but also to have a historical context for how blessed they are, right, to live in the time they do, when things weren't the way they are now for women. Certainly when I was a girl, when my mother was a girl. You're younger than me. But talk about that as a mom for a second, Lindsey. Do you have concerns about women's freedoms being rolled back and what your daughters may have as opposed to what you grew up with?
I do, Sophia. And, I was having this conversation with my husband a few weeks ago. We were walking and, my background is as a conservative. And so, we always espouse, meritocracy. And, I literally worked with an organization where we gave out a Horatio Alger Award. And so this kind of, um, you know, propagandist, kind of rhetoric where it is the Handmaid's Tale, and we are going to be living the Handmaid's Tale. I think in not so far in the past, I would have kind of gone, okay, sure, like you keep thinking that, like what are like
But
what
now,
and especially Sophia, you and I having really lived inside the political system, I think it was also
as
um,
Republican women,
as Republican women, I'm going, I'm in the belly of the beast. I see what's happening. I really don't think that there is merit to what you're saying here. There's kind of no there. Although now if I sat down with someone who was espousing these, kind of conspiracy theories and suggesting that, the idea of rolling back of access to women's health and the Dobbs decision, looking at the stacking of the court system by a far right kind of MAGA movement, the stacking of state legislatures, the increased rollout in states' rights. and looking at that. And then you start listening to the rhetoric of someone like an Elon Musk and the access he has to the executive branch and his focus on birth rates. You look at the early orders coming out from Secretary Duffy related to infrastructure and a focus on allocating federal funds for infrastructure based on birth rate. And you kind of go, okay, a few years ago, I would have thought that person was
Right.
more wacky. And now I'm going, well, that tracks and that
Yeah.
tracks.
Yeah.
So, I think it's important that we all pay attention to this. And I don't have a tinfoil hat for sure. But if you look at the trends and if you look at, what has happened with relation to women's reproductive health and reproductive rights, and you look at what's happening with some of the court's decisions, and then you look at the focus on things like birth rates. Look, I would no longer look at someone making a case like that and think that they were, kind of loony. I'm going, well,
Yeah.
that all tracks now, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think a lot of women, particularly women who tend to be more conservative, like you said, they really. I saw a lot of Republican women supporting Harris this time around, and a lot of women concerned about reproductive freedom, but understanding that reproductive freedom, like I consider myself pro-life, rape, incest, life of the mother, but I'm pro-freedom, which means that I believe Lindsay, Jane, Sarah can make a different choice than me, and they don't have to make the same choice I do, which probably means I'm pro-choice, I guess, but I am pro-freedom. And I think that freedom is really the operative word right now, right, Lindsay? We're seeing a
Yeah, you
lot
and
of
I
our
have spoken
freedoms
about
rolled
that,
back.
Sophia.
Yeah.
Yeah, freedom.
So my I think what my audience really wants to know is we find ourselves in this very dire moment. I think even the most optimistic person is a little bit concerned with the division, the abject partisanship. There is no bipartisanship. The angry attacks at one another, the vitriol, the unkindness. And it seems to be getting worse and worse. And then the economy now is really starting to, markets are not liking all this tariff talk. And so people feel very disillusioned right now, both in the Republican Party, not MAGA, not the hardcore folks who I think really buy into the I want to do this to the libs, or I'm, Trump's my guy no matter what he does. I think that Democrats are also concerned that their party doesn't seem equipped to push back in the right way, right?
Mm-hmm.
So here you are, Mr. and Mrs. Joe America, and you're like, this system is broken. I mean, the two parties are just ridiculous. One's crazy right, one's crazy left. Tell me about the Forward Party.
So the Forward Party, I want to go back to something you said
Absolutely.
just a moment ago, Sophia, when you talked about the notion of taking things away, because I think that is a theme that runs throughout a number of these issues. There's a lot of discussion about fear and this movement being one predicated on fear, and the idea of taking things away. So whether we're talking about, you just invoked tariffs. So whether you're talking about tariffs, you're talking about DEI, the notion is that these are, we have an administration right now that is advancing a culture where you've been had.
Yes.
He's telling everybody they've been had.
Yeah,
And
that's
this
good.
is, it is a culture of taking things away. And the Republican Party, Paul Ryan used to always say that the difference between the Republican Party and the Democratic Party is that the Republican Party wanted to grow the pie and the Democratic Party wanted to cut it into smaller pieces. And you no longer have either party right now looking at a culture of growth and abundance. Instead is a culture of scarcity. People are trying to take things away from you. Who's trying to take things away from you? Who has really gotten you? Is it the Canadians? Is it the Mexicans? Is it the Panamanians? Is it Greenland?
The blacks, the women, the gays, the whoever.
The women,
Yeah.
they have taken this from you.
Yes.
And because we are a culture of scarcity, and this is now a scarcity mindset, we no longer have access to growth and vision and opportunity and abundance. So that's where the Forward Party comes in. The Forward Party is about growth. It is about opportunity. It is about abundance. We do not believe in a culture of scarcity. We believe in ideological inclusion. We believe there is room for everybody at the table. And if we come together and do so with a shared sense of a shared set of values and principles, really basic stuff like upholding the Constitution, adherence to the rule of law, grace and tolerance, a commitment to doing more listening than talking, making decisions based on data and science.
Instead of misinformation, disinformation, abject lies.
Oh my
Okay.
gosh.
Yeah.
If we come together to look at new innovative policy solutions to address the real systemic issues facing our nation, and we do it with a mindset of abundance, growth, pragmatism, common sense, that we can accomplish great things. And we believe at the Forward Party that's actually where most Americans fall. Most Americans are not scared of one another. They don't have a scarcity mindset because we are this incredible country of innovation and creation. So why shouldn't we have that in our political system? And that's what we're building here.
Lindsey, let's talk about data for a moment. So if we were to break down the political parties, the last time I checked, and I think it was about a week ago, I was working on my Atlanta Journal column, and I was referring to the two traditional parties, Republicans and Democrats. And each one of them has somewhere between, depending on what you look at, 29, maybe 28% to like 30%, and then they kind of top out.
Yep.
And if you gave both the Republicans and the Democrats, let's say 30% each, that's 60%. That leaves 40% of the electorate that is independent, either left or independent, a little right or center. But then when you get, Lindsey, to voting, and you can go to 2024 and our last number of elections, except for 2020, which was an anomaly because we had the early voting and the mail-in, and so the turnout was super high because of COVID. But if you go traditionally, pretty much 50% of the country doesn't vote. And that bothers me, and I know it bothers you. Does the Forward Party try to focus on those people that have kind of said, I'm opting out? Or how do you get to that 40%? And tell us about where the Forward Party goes, and also educate people. Are you a real party? And what I mean by that is, are you setting up? Do you have candidates running for office? Like, break it down for us.
Yeah. So last summer, at its peak, Pew had Americans that were registered as independents or unaffiliated or other, depends on the state, how they classify someone who registers outside of the Republican and Democratic parties, at 51% was actually their high. Now, you've got a lot of states that do same-day voter registration and things like that. So you've got folks who register with a party on the same day. So that number dropped down a bit on Election Day in November. But let's look at that high watermark, which is 51% of Americans who are registered independents. And Sophia, you talked about folks who are disillusioned, disaffected voters in the two-party system. That number doesn't capture them.
Wow.
So we are building something that is for those folks.
And so wait, put a pin in that, as Oprah would say. That's a aha moment. So what you're saying is, in both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, there are voters who are turned off by their respective parties. Is that what you're saying?
Oh yeah. Look at some of the split ticket voters. So so let's take us back to, the Georgia election in 2022, for example. So when you had Herschel Walker as the Republican Senate candidate, and then you had Brad Raffensperger on the same Republican ticket running, who had stood up to President Trump, refusing to find the extra missing votes. And you had a lot of registered Republicans who voted for Brad Raffensperger and left it blank.
They did, yes.
Now, they didn't necessarily cross the ticket, but they did leave it blank. So, and you're seeing that in different folks in the Democratic primary in Michigan this year. They had huge numbers of Democrats voting in that closed party primary who voted for other.
Yeah, wow. Not slacking, huh?
In Pennsylvania, Nikki Haley had already dropped out of the primary this year for president. And you had 157,000 registered Republicans in Pennsylvania voted for Nikki Haley in a closed party primary over Donald J. Trump. which they kind of knew was throwing away their vote.
Right.
But those
But it
numbers
was a
are evidence.
protest of sorts.
It's a
Yeah.
protest. And they're
Interesting.
saying, I'm not happy here. I
Okay.
showed up to the polls. I came to vote. I'm registered with the party, but I'm not happy with it.
Mm.
So we are building that for all of those voters across America. We are building it as a political party. And one of the first questions that I get from folks is in large part, Lindsey and Sophia, you just said that an unprecedented number of Americans are leaving the two-party system and re-registering as independents. Why in the world would you create a new political party? They don't like parties. And what I say is because you don't want to show up to a knife fight with a pool noodle, because they are playing by the rules that they set. They made the rules of the game. So
Right.
if we're going to change the system,
Right.
we have to play by their rules.
Yes.
And the rules of the political party
But
dictate.
Lindsey, this has been our system since the beginning. I mean, it was the Whigs before that, before the Republicans came on the scene, but the Democrats have been around a long time.
But they have raised the barrier for entry time and time again. As soon as folks start to get to a place where they look like they could introduce competition, they raise the barrier. To get on the ballot as an independent candidate, you have, depending on the state, and each state has its own laws, it requires more signatures than to do it as an independent than it does to get on the ballot as a member of one of the legacy parties. If you do get on the ballot, you are not able to raise money in the same amounts of money that people from the legacy parties are. So, I look at Florida, for example. Let's look at Florida. Their campaign finance law is such that you can, the Florida party, the Republican Party and the Florida Democratic Party have really, really, really high thresholds for what people can give. I think you can give $50,000 to the state party. And the state party, if I recall, can support a candidate for statewide office in an unlimited amount of money.
Wow.
So if you have a Florida Republican Party, you can give Sophia, you can give them $50,000. And then the Republican Party of Florida can support a candidate for governor, treasurer, attorney general in an unlimited capacity.
Wow.
If you want to run as an independent for governor in Florida, I can give you $3,300.
Wow.
I can give you $3,300. So that's the sort of barrier for entry that they have created. So if we're going to compete with these folks, if we are going to create a home for American voters, we got to play by their same rules, which means we have to become a political party.
Yep.
The other reason
Lindsey, how does that happen? Put a pin in that quickly. How do you become a political party in the sense of how we do it here in the United States? So
every state has different election laws. They each have their own election laws. Some states, it's not as difficult. Other states, it's very, very difficult. It is oftentimes a combination of signature collections of registered voters in the state. So going to registered voters across the state, asking them for their signature, taking those signatures to the Secretary of State, where they will verify those signatures, authorize them. Then oftentimes that is coupled with running a candidate for statewide office and achieving a particular threshold of the vote. So it could be 2%, it could be 5%, and you usually have to do it within a certain time frame of having collected those signatures.
I see.
Similarly, if you do that, there's usually kind of a timeline. There's work that you have to do to maintain that ballot line, so you don't have it forever. So again,
it's a pretty tall order to do this. It's not easy.
No, and that's state by state. Then once you achieve that in a critical number of states, you go to the Federal Election Commission, and the Federal Election Commission says, have you run candidates for office for federal office? So again, ballot access state by state, they usually want you to run someone statewide. You go to the Federal Election Commission, which is the governing agency that runs all of our elections, which, by the way, who runs the FEC, Sophia?
Yeah.
Half Republicans, half Democrats. So
appointed.
I'm Chick-fil-A, and I got to go to a board managed by Taco Bell and McDonald's to say, look, I want to open a Chick-fil-A down the street. And Taco Bell and McDonald's are like,
yeah, you got to hope they let you do it. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, like the barrier for entry continues to raise. So I go.
Put a pin in that. Put a pin. Yeah. I love doing this because I want people to learn. Now, folks, I want you to hear what the good woman just said here. If you're wondering why, because I've had so many people, and I know you have asked me when I'm speaking, television, whatever, Sophia, why don't we just have a third party? It's time. We need one. I see it all the time. This is why. It is very difficult, but this lady does this every day. That's her job. She is the executive director of the Forward Party at the national level. So she has to do all of the federal stuff. Then she's got to deal state by state by state because it's not a uniform, right, Lindsey?
No.
Virginia, Kentucky, and Alabama are all very different.
Yeah.
Right?
Alabama happens to be one of the most challenging, actually.
Right. So when you think of that, folks, again, we're giving you a bit of an education, and I wanted to be a little nerdy in this instance because
It's a little
one
wonky.
of the problems,
It's a little wonky.
right, but one of the problems with our civics right now, people, Lindsey, I've learned in the last 50 days, people don't know the basic function of what Article 1, Article 2, Article 3 is. They don't know what the president does. They don't know what the Congress does. They don't know what the judiciary does. They don't understand what the agencies and the departments do, who has the power of the purse, who has the power of firing, who does X, Y, Z. Basic stuff that you learned in probably 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. Most people don't know. So having you here is important because if the Forward Party is going to become a force, are you going to become a force?
We are going to be a national political force. That is our goal.
By when? What is your goal to do that?
So our goal to do that is 2028.
Okay.
And I love that you said be a force because that's actually the language we use, Sophia. Our goal is to be a national political force. I don't wake up every morning thinking, gosh, wouldn't it be wonderful to have a new political party? No, we need a force. We need a force to introduce competition.
I like that.
It is through competition that we will reduce toxic polarization, that we will reduce extremism, because Americans will have a choice when they go into their polling place. They will have an option for someone who is ideologically inclusive, who shares their values, who just wants to get things done. And we are the ones who are going to elevate those candidates. We are going to build a national network of people who are demanding that change. And we are going to do it. We are deploying a movement through a political party.
You know, Lindsey, full disclaimer to my listeners. Some of you know this, you follow me, but I am involved in the Forward Party in Virginia. And I'm on executive committee.
Our official asterisk. We need someone to come on with it.
I want to make sure I'm honest, though. I am involved and I'm on the executive committee at the state level here in the Commonwealth, but also I'm vice chair of communications. So Lindsey and I work together a lot, but I think it was really important to have this discussion because to me, we have something happening next year in July. Our sesquicentennial is the way you say it. 250 years.
I've practiced that.
Yes, me too. 250 years. And I think it is not by accident. Not by accident at all. I'm a woman of faith, as are you. But I think it's a little bit providential that going into our 250th year next year, we find ourselves where we are. And we are literally having debates over King Donald I, my last column, the cover of Newsweek, the cover of Time, and how the executive is trying to overexert its authority. And how the Democratic Party in Congress is pretty neutered because they don't have the House or the Senate. And how the Republicans are capitulating instead of advising and consenting or pushing back and doing what they should. And then the judiciary is rolling along really slowly, right? Because that's the way the judiciary moves. And so I find it interesting, Lindsey, that in 2026, there's going to be a course correction, midterms, and it's going to be fascinating to watch how America reacts to from January 2025 to November 2026. Thoughts on the 2026 cycle based on where we are now in March of 2025? And what is the Forward Party going to be doing in 26? Are you going to field candidates? How's that going to go?
The pendulum swing that you're predicting is not unusual. I think your listeners probably all know that it is not unusual in the midterm election to see a transfer of power in Congress away from whomever is in the Oval Office. What's interesting right now is the extra power that in our lifetimes we have never seen placed in the hands of the judicial branch making decisions, asking the courts to make decisions that typically they would never have to weigh in on, because you have a functioning legislative branch of government.
Yep.
We have a non-functioning legislative branch of government for a whole host of reasons.
Yep.
You use the word neutered. I mean, they're not doing much of anything right now, which means that check and balance that we're all expecting and waiting for, since they're not doing it, the courts are picking that up.
They've exceeded their power. It's a fascinating thing to watch.
They've absolutely exceeded their power, but is that our fault? Right? Like we keep giving them things to rule on because Congress can't make up their minds on things.
That's a good point.
So I think as constituents, it's our job, and that starts with civic education, and reminding people where the power sits, is to hold their own representatives accountable to act, and to do their job as the check to the executive branch of government, so that we don't see an overreach right now on the judicial branch. But going back to 2026, it is not unusual to see a shift. I think to a certain extent, people expect it. We will see. We have an executive branch right now that is wanting to absolutely remake the American economy. So I think back to 2017 and the president's inaugural address, and the first real understanding I think I had on this concept of an America First agenda. What is this America First agenda, right? And so and he did not realize it in its entirety in his first term. This term, he wants to completely remake the American economy, so that
government.
But the economy I'm invoking, especially right now, as relates to the midterm elections, because it's to completely dismantle the American economy and rebuild it as an economy that is producing all of its goods domestically, that is no longer a global integrated economy, but one that is fostered here on our shores, is a tall order to happen between now and the end of the year.
Yeah, that's a decade-long process if you're going to commit to it.
I mean, he's trying to completely dismantle an economy that's a century in the making. How that is going to, I think that's disproportionately going to affect next year's elections. We talked again about independent voters, disaffected voters right now, who are still registered in the two-party system.
Don't you think that will be very intense, though, come 2026? I think people are going to be pretty pissed off by 2026. Yeah. I can't imagine what it looks like 7 months from now. I don't know. None of us. Forward Party, talk to me. What are you guys going to do in 2025? Are you running candidates in the states in 2026? You're going to run congressional candidates?
Absolutely.
Okay,
absolutely.
Good.
We so as I mentioned, in order to go to the Federal Election Commission and apply for federal party status, you have to show that you've run candidates for federal office. But politics, democracy is about people, right? Sophia, like you and I have talked about this. So in order to build a movement for political change, it's about people. Now, the Forward Party is not about one person. We are not a movement that is, the Tea Party movement happened, and then Donald Trump became the personification of the Tea Party movement. The Forward Party and the Forward movement is not one person. What it is the incredible, beautiful fabric that is all of our candidates and all of our supporters and grassroots and stakeholders at all levels across the country. Last year, we ran 125 candidates. We have 47 individuals serving in positions of elected office around the country. This year, we will be running candidates in the Commonwealth. We're very excited, where Virginia has off-year elections. And then we have some really, really aspirational goals for 2026 to run candidates up and down the ballot. Now, we have to run candidates at the federal level in order to go to the Federal Election Commission. It's also important to introduce new competition at the federal level when you have a Congress right now that is completely stuck and
I really think for the Forward Party, Lindsey, and again, I want you to distinguish between independent and the Forward Party, and I think you've done a good job, but I really want people to focus on what she said. You can run as an independent. That's always an option, right? in any state. You just have to do whatever the rules require. But building a party means building an infrastructure. It means fundraising support. It means volunteers. It means leaders. It means donors. It means all of those things that allow you to at least get up to bat. Am I right?
All of it. And so yes, we're running federal candidates for office, but we're really focused on down ballot candidates. We're really focused on school boards, city council. What do state legislatures look like around the country? Because those are folks who are very much in touch with their communities.
Yes.
So they understand what their community is looking for. And we are excited to support candidates who are running for those seats as independents. A lot of those down ballot seats, Sophia, are nonpartisan.
Absolutely.
But those nonpartisan candidates typically depend on the infrastructure. So going back to infrastructure of the two-party system. I need a campaign manager. I need a comms director. I need someone to build my website. I need a donate button on my website. I need to understand voter registration lists in my community so I can knock doors.
So you have to educate people, candidates, train them.
Who owns all that?
Yes,
Sophia.
they do.
They own all of it. So I talked about like Taco Bell and McDonald's, right? So like the Democratic Party owns all of the infrastructure to support candidates who are running on the Democratic ballot. And you have nonpartisan candidates who will run with the endorsement of the Democratic Party so that they can access all of that infrastructure. The Republican Party does the same thing. If you want to run as a new party candidate, if you want to be Chick-fil-A, you have nothing. There is very little talent. There is not a centralized voter registration list. There is not a donate button. All of your listeners are not only familiar with, but probably really irritated by Win Red and Act Blue. You support one person with that button and you're inundated, right?
Yeah, if I got one more email from my beloved sorority sister Kamala Harris, who I love, adore, and gave a lot of my money to, I was going to rip my hair out.
You're gonna rip your hair out. And you know what she did too, is that then all the other Democrats are going to have access to your information. So independent candidates don't have any of that, which means if you want to run and serve outside of the two-party system, you need someone to support you. That's the other thing that Forward is doing. We are building the political infrastructure to support independent and nonpartisan candidates across the country so that they are no longer beholden to the litmus tests applied by the partisan extremes. That is what will free our candidates. It is what will change their incentives in terms of the way they govern, and it will allow them to look at their constituents first and ignore the party extremes on the side.
You know, Lindsey, as we get ready, we get about 8 minutes or so left. We can take 10, but I think you've done a really good job when you think about, again, the average person out there. They're working, they're trying to take care of their family. Politics is a thing that they just kind of see on the news and, yeah, I'll go vote in my elections. We know that turnout, for example, in the Commonwealth of Virginia this year in the off election will be low for governor. Yeah. Governor will be at the top of the ballot, the state legislature, and then, like you said, local races, at school board, et cetera, et cetera.
Do you know what the turnout was last gubernatorial race in the primaries?
Yeah, it was really bad. It was in the 20s or something, wasn't it?
That's what Americans need to understand.
It was really disappointing.
It's in a closed party primary.
Yes.
That's 20% of registered people only within one party.
Let's talk about that for a moment. You brought that up. Let's go there, and then I want to talk about ranked choice voting and then close it out. You talked about the primaries. Tell us why the primary system is not a good system that we have right now.
So voter turnout is part of the solution here. And we started early in this conversation talking about voter participation and voter turnout. Voter turnout is critical. Competition is critical. So the Forward Party we are working to introduce competition. We hope to inspire voters in a way that will increase voter turnout and give them options that get them excited to increase voter turnout. But the reality is in many states, and specifically 14 around the country, you have what is called a closed party primary. That means you have to be registered with one of the two parties in order to participate in the primaries. Now, 87%.
Which is awful. That is an awful thing. You just shut out most of your voters in your state.
Most of your voters. 87% of congressional districts are decidedly red or blue. They're not even competitive.
Wow.
Which means by the time you get to November, you already know if it's going to be a Democrat or a Republican that wins. They're not even
whoever won the primary, right? Pretty much is the
it's
winner.
whoever won the primary.
Yeah.
Well, when you think about voter turnout across the country, really the highest you ever see in terms of voter turnout in a primary is 25%. In a closed party primary state, that means, and this is what we were just talking about in Virginia, that means it's people who are showing up, and we don't have a national primary date. That's one solution, right? So some states it's April, some states it's May, June, some it's really late, like August. Means you have to show up, not November, but you have to show up early, and you have to vote for the people who are competing for the spot for the nomination of that singular party. So you have to be registered as a Republican to decide who is going to advance on the Republican ticket. You have to be registered as a Democrat to decide who's going to advance on the Democratic ticket. But what were you and I just talking about? High water mark last summer. Pew, 51% of American voters are registered as independents. You are locked out of the ability to cast your vote in a closed party primary where taxpayers pay for our primary systems. They pay for our polling places. That's taxpayer funded money.
Right. And they don't ask you, hey, Lindsey, Sophia, when you're stroking that check to the IRS and the state government, which party are you in? And that's not the point. You're paying taxes. And if you're an independent, which, by the way, she's made the case several times, is the majority usually of voters in any given state, you don't get to participate. It's a Ponzi scheme. It's not a good one.
Well, and think about it. So, you were talking earlier, Sophia, about like, how do Americans really think about politics, pay attention to politics? They don't the way you and I do. They shouldn't. They have a much healthier life, probably.
Absolute truth. Less insanity, less headaches, less upset. Right? Yes, absolutely.
But those folks don't necessarily understand there's two moments. So who's participating in those primaries? The people who are rabid politicos, who are really, really focused.
The hardcore believers.
They're the hardcore believers. Yeah. And I will tell you, and there have been many, many, many polls about this. So this isn't, I'm not offering opinion. This is based on a lot of exit polling. Those tend to be the most extreme within the two-party system. So the folks that are showing up in Republican Party primaries are the most extreme, considered to be the most kind of purists. And similarly on the Democratic Party, these folks overwhelmingly think that the word compromise is a bad word.
Yes.
I mean, I've seen lots of poll numbers. Like, how do you feel about compromise? They think compromise is terrible. Now you move into the general election and that all shifts. You have folks who say, oh, bipartisanship's excellent. I think compromise is good. I think we should work across the aisle. By and large, the people that participate in our primaries don't feel that way. And it has fueled this cycle of extremism in the American political system.
Stop there. Did you hear what she said? Listen to what she said. So the primary happens and only 25%, maybe 30% if you're lucky, of voters are showing up. And the voters that are showing up are rabidly partisan in whatever way, whether it's the Republican or the Democrat. And then we get to the general. Well, guess what? It's kind of too late because the primary gave you the candidate. And think about Trump. Remember the 2016 election? There were how many Republicans running? Christie, Rubio, Haley, right? Yeah. And who won? The most extreme, the guy with the in-your-face, rabid, take no hostages, you're fired. We got that guy again. And that's, I believe, Lindsey, why he won again, because nobody even challenged him in the primary but Haley, well, DeSantis and others, but it was a fait accompli. He didn't show up to one debate. He didn't campaign. And he still got the nomination. That should really turn everybody off.
Well, I don't, I'm really thoughtful about, we talked earlier about words and about right now, a lot of these executive orders are banning certain verbiage, and it's because words matter. So I'm very careful that I don't use words like rigged, that our system is rigged, because our system is not rigged. It isn't, but it is working in the way they want it to work right now, which is that neither party participated fully in the democratic process in our presidential election cycle. Neither did. And so it is not so much that the system is rigged. I think, it is that the parties themselves are taking over our democratic processes and taking away the powers of the voters. We have every opportunity within our democratic structures, Sophia, to restore them and strengthen them.
Lindsey, as we wind down, I want to really give you the floor to just talk about the values of the Forward Party and why it matters so much now, and to congratulate you on your work, because it's hard work, and to congratulate Andrew and Governor Whitman, who I've known since I was a 20-something-year-old and worked for her right out of law school, and Lieutenant Governor Healy. And so we got some really good people involved who have been in elective office as Republicans and or Democrats. And I saw that we just got a new state senator in Utah. Is that
We
correct?
sure did.
And,
Dan Thatcher. Welcome, Senator
I-
Dan Thatcher, to the Forward Party.
I keep hoping we can snatch Bernie Sanders and make him come over to the light. But, because he's really, give this guy his props in his 80s, packing out these big crowds. But what he's saying aligns with what you're saying, Lindsey, about taking the government back in the power of the people and having a more optimistic, inclusive, robust outlook on who we are and who we want to be. But, as we wind down, I want to just give you an opportunity. Want to tell people how they can learn more about the Forward Party, why you think they ought to give it a look. And particularly, in this moment that we're in, what are the values that you think the Forward Party represents that can break through all this noise and this rancor and upset? Because I think it's necessary.
Yeah, thank you, Sophia. Again, thank you for having me and for the opportunity right now to espouse our values and talk about our work specifically. As I mentioned earlier, respect for the law and the Constitution at the forefront of our values. Grace and tolerance. This is really important because we have a candidate pledge, and we ask our candidates to sign that pledge. And sometimes they are going to behave. People are messy, right? Sometimes people are going to behave in a way that you're not crazy about. So let's give them grace. Let's give them space to talk about what that looks like. That's really, really important. The other is a commitment to collaborative work, right? So working collaboratively, and that means using data to drive solutions, really building from the bottom up and not the top down. So thinking about how is the work that they're doing as elected officials, how is it community oriented? Is it consensus driven? Is there active communications with their constituents? The other is treating everyone with respect and dignity. How do we look to our elected officials as role models? How are they behaving in a way that exemplifies integrity and compassion? So those are some kind of basic tenets of the party that we're building right now. And I will share this with your listeners. We are building out our platform beyond our original founding values and principles, and we're doing it in under kind of three areas. One is dignity. So how is everything that we're advancing as a party rooted in dignity? And right now, we've taken issue with some of the executive orders that have come out of this White House because they do not uphold the dignity of American people. The other is dynamism. So I talked about a culture of abundance and a growth mindset. How are we looking at opportunities for a dynamic and growth-oriented economy? And the last is democracy. So what are we doing as a party? What are our elected officials and our members doing to restore and strengthen our democracy? One of the things that we're doing is looking at these nonpartisan voting innovations that you mentioned, ranked choice voting. How are we opening our primary systems up? How are we working to have a more responsive government that is representative of our voters, because the voters actually have a voice in the process? So that is kind of a sense of our platform and how we approach all of this, Sophia.
How can people find the Forward Party, get involved, learn more?
Great. So go to forwardparty.com. On our website, we have a map of the United States. You can click on your state, go ahead and fill out a volunteer form. Please put your contact information in there. We are really proud of the fact that someone will call you. We have amazing volunteers.
Wow.
A human being will call you and get you involved. We have all sorts of ways for volunteers to get involved. We talked about a lot of the barriers for entry for a new political party.
Mm-hmm.
We need we need a swell of volunteers in order to do that, to collect the signatures, to recruit candidates, to get the message out. Our volunteers do that all across the country, and they're just extraordinary. You brought up Senator Dan Thatcher. I didn't go to Salt Lake City and meet with Senator Thatcher. Our volunteers in Utah did that. They
That's
constructed
awesome.
the relationship. They inspired him because they live their values every day. And he said, I no longer have a home in this version of the Republican Party. It is not representative of my principles, but those folks are. So it's incredible. You can sign up for a volunteer. You can get involved in your states. And the other thing is we have a wonderful group of different committees and affinity groups. So if you're really passionate about getting involved in politics because you're a woman and you want to make sure women are represented and have political power, join our women's committee.
It's awesome. It's a great committee. I'm on it. It's good.
Sophia, they're wonderful. Our Black Voters Committee, it is incredibly important that this party is representative of all Americans and that folks who come to our party feel a sense of belonging. And our Black Voters Committee, our LGBTQ committee has just been wonderful. We are just now launching our AAPI committee. We want voters to come to
veterans. We have all that.
Veterans and Veterans Family Committee is very, very active. They've been having a lot of impassioned discussion, especially related to the recent VA layoffs. And I'm so glad that folks who are frustrated, angry, scared, sad, all the emotions, feel that they can come to us and have a place not only of belonging, but of action. How can they turn those feelings into action? And we're so grateful for all of the work that they do.
Well, I tell you what attracted me to the Forward Party, Lindsey. One, you and I, again, coming out of the Republican Party, and both of us worked on the Hill, state parties. We've been, in the Oval. We've been with governors. We did this a long time. And when our values no longer aligned with this new version that was kind of born in 2016, 2017, never Trumpers, call us what you will, I really love that the values you espoused with the Forward Party. If I were to take those as a political scientist and look at them, I'd be like, that's different. Dynamism and democracy and grace and respect. Those are interesting words we don't hear anymore. And I think that's where so many people are. And it's why they've stopped voting. It's why they're turned off. It's why they turn off the television, because it's just noise now. And so, again, I congratulate you because you have really been on the ground doing the hard work, the leadership. I love our party in Virginia. I think we're poised to do a lot of really great things in the Commonwealth.
Is awesome.
This
Shout
cycle
out to
and the next
Chris
cycle.
And Eric and Madison. They're great.
Yes, we just have a great group of people, and we're really excited. And Virginia does have what is it? We don't have party registration in our primaries. Like, you can get a Dem ballot or a Republican ballot when you walk up, but still you got to choose one of them. Yes, the independent person is on either ballot, but that's not the point. The point is that I think we have a lot of work to do. And thank you for the work that you're doing and for being a woman that is really in the power seat in the Forward Party. And it's one of the things I like about the Forward Party. Women are in the leadership, at least half, right? Would you say?
Oh, our executive chair, Carrie Healy, was the former lieutenant governor of Massachusetts.
Under Mitt, right?
Under Mitt. Governor Christine Todd Whitman, one of our co-founders, is extraordinary. I learned so much from both of them every day. One of our board members was one of the first female partners at Blackstone.
Wow.
She's just a powerhouse. Another woman on our board she negotiated ballot access for Mike Bloomberg to run for mayor as an independent on the ballot line for the Independence Party in New York. She is one of the shrewdest negotiators and diplomats I've ever met. So very, very strong, empowered leadership by women at the Forward Party.
And I think that's attractive because the other parties are very male heavy in the sense of the leadership. And particularly the Republican Party, there's very few women in the leadership in the Republican Party right now. I would say they lost ground from the years that Whitman was there and others. They've kind of gone backwards. So again, give the Forward Party a look. I wanted to do this because I think it's important for you guys to know Lindsey, for you to know that there is something else, that there is another option. You don't have to participate in chaos and confusion, and you can really focus on the things that matter to you, and you can get involved and you can have a voice. It's kind of the exciting thing about getting involved in a new party.
We're a startup, Sophia.
Yeah, it's a great way to put it.
2.5 years old. So folks that are coming to us now, oftentimes I will say, if you want a new political power in the United States of America, help us build it.
Build it.
We haven't created something that is so locked that that folks can't come and have an extraordinary influence on what we're doing every day, which is why we're building it from the ground up.
You know, guys, I'll do in the after commentary, I'll do a little bit of some thoughts on what we heard today. But I love our slogan, not left, not right, forward.
Forward.
And I think this country needs a pathway forward, much like 1854 when the Republican Party was born. I think of that analogy often. We talk about it, and then this skinny person kid out of Illinois comes along, and the rest is history. A guy named Abe Lincoln, you heard of him, right? And so it can be done. It has been done in our history before.
And it was a coalition effort too, Sophia.
Absolutely.
And this is going to be a coalition effort. So this is going to be an exercise in folks coming together from all sorts of different ways of life, representing different coalitions and stakeholders, driving towards the same shared goal for a representative and responsive government that shirks the extremes, that does everything we can to reduce toxic polarization. And again, we said this earlier in the conversation. I believe truly that's what Americans want. You see people leaving the political parties. The numbers would indicate that's what people want. So come and build it with us.
You know, just kind of as two human beings, you know, life is hard enough, right? And as you get older, it gets more interesting. It's both a joy and a delight, but you begin to realize at some point when you hit my age in your 50s that you got less time ahead than you do behind. And I'm loving that your dog just got up on the couch. It's awesome.
We're a dog on Sophia. We're a dog on Sophia.
And I'm like, what is that? But, you know, when I think about that, Lindsey, and you think about what you care about, time with your family, time with your friends, something, you know, you want to do the things on your bucket list, you want to travel, you want to have some joy in your life. And I think that's why a lot of people have completely checked out. Yeah. Because politics is so nasty and so divisive. So anything we can do, and again, the work you're doing, I know you probably have days where you don't think it matters, or you're like, what am I doing? You're making a difference, because a decade from now, I think the work that we're putting in, and hopefully the people that watch this, we're going to get some people that join up, that get curious, that ask questions, and get involved. You know, guys, it's all about we the people of the United States of America, in order to form a more perfect union. Keep that in mind. It didn't say thee, the president, thou, the courts, you, the Congress. It said we the people of the United States. And Lindsey said this, that this is a people movement. It's a force. It is a coalition. So get involved and let's do something different. Not left, not right, forward. Lindsey, thank you for joining us. It has been my pleasure.
Sophia, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much.
Talk to you soon. Bye, puppy.